My name is Michael Coates. I'm a former firefighter, but I'm also a former soldier. And it's the stories from the individuals within this military community that I'm desperate to document. In this special episode, we record live from the National Army Museum in London. We talk with 3 panellists about their military service, injury, rehab, and recovery. With Harry Parker, Gemma Morgan, and Simon Brown. A Road to Recovery special. This is Declassified. Harry, what's your first military memory?
So my dad was in the army throughout the whole of my career, and also when I was growing up. So I can't really remember. It was sort of running around the officers' mess and stealing Coke cans out of the mess fridge, and seeing the armoured vehicles going around the camp and things like that. So it's very hard to sort of pinpoint when it was. I think I sort of grew up with that sort of atmosphere around my childhood. We lived in Gibraltar in Germany, and all the other usual suspects around the south of England.
And was it always on the cards to join?
No, absolutely not. No, I never went in cadets or any of those opportunities, and I went to art school and thought I'm going to be a fine artist. But I think it was always there as something that I might go and do. And left art school and thought, well, what do I do now? And so, I walked into the Strand recruiting office, which is gone now, because I didn't want to sort of say to Dad, oh, I'm thinking about joining the army. I wanted to sort of do it on my own, and went down to Lympstone to do the selection there and got a place there, and then and ended up with sort of this offer from Sandhurst and Lympstone, and had to make a decision. And that's when I said to Dad, "What do you reckon?" And he sort of laughed. That was the sort of path into the military. Yeah.
And Gemma, the same question. What was your first military memory?
Yeah, I didn't come from a military family. So my parents were quite shocked when I suddenly announced I was going to join after uni. I think my first memory, certainly that first day at Sandhurst, parking up on the parade square, it's the only day you're allowed to do it, and walking up the big steps, and at the top you've got the directing staff, and just thinking, well, what am I doing? I had no idea what was about to hit me. And I think probably within those first 5 weeks of training, I didn't know what barrack dress was, I didn't know how to tie my laces, and the staff sergeant screaming at us, someone had done something wrong, and we had to do a changing parade, which basically is, as you will know, you're in and out your rooms in different dress. And I remember there were these photos on the wall of barrack dress and, all the different PE kit and everything, and I'm out there looking for the next one, trying to get changed in time. So I think, that was kind of baptism of fire, I think.
Sounds like it. And what was the reason for joining?
I went to an all-girls school. Careers evening, the military were never there. It wasn't what women did. When I went to Sandhurst, we were one of the first intakes where women did the same as the men at Sandhurst. So it's all quite new. I'd gone to uni, thought I wanted to teach, did my teacher training in inner city Birmingham, thought, Lord above, what am I doing? And so I came out and started working as a fitness consultant for a while. And then a friend was in, and within 6 months I'd gone through what is now Army Officer Selection Board, and I was at Sandhurst in the January of '96.
Simon, what was your background growing up as a kid?
Yeah, I'm from a council estate in South Leeds, but my first memory in the military would be getting abandoned in Warminster by my parents at summer holidays, because my granddad was serving at the time. So we used to get ditched down there, and then we just walk around Warminster camp causing havoc. And then when later on in life, got through school, I didn't do right well academically, and I was struggling just doing sort of labouring jobs. And my dad said, we thought about military. I walked into the careers office, and Navy said no. so all right. And fortunately, Army were next door. So what about you? I said, yeah, why not? And literally, so 97, 96, I actually put my name to paper. But with my granddad being from Southern Ireland, there were a lot of security, in mid-90s around checking that. And then, I went home and told my dad I joined the army. With him being RAF, he packed my bags for me. So if you want to live outside, you can live in garden. But no, my family were supportive, and I had a good family. It's just there wasn't going on. You know, the mining and mill industries had all gone where I grew up, and the people I was hanging around with weren't right positive. So I wanted to do more with my life than just do dead end jobs. You know, trying to earn a couple of quid to get liquored up.
Yeah. Was you physical as a kid? Did you play sport? Did you?
Yeah, I played rugby, football, and that, and I just love being outside. I mean, summer holidays, you're booted out of the house and you don't come home till the street lights come on. So, you know, being outside I loved, and like I said, competitive sports, stuff like that were brilliant. And that was all stuff that would all be in good stead later on when I went to basic training.
Did you thrive in basic training?
They hated me. Because I was only Yorkshireman in training, so one of the training corporals had made it his mission to get rid of me. And because I just like brushed it off or whatever, he threatened to chin me one day, and I says, he says, "You want to whip me, don't you, Brown?" I went, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, are you going to do it?" I said, "Well, there's no point hitting you because you'll throw me out." I says, I'll hit you once I've done my passing out parade." And we did passing out parade, and being 6'3", I went right marker. And we got back into the room and everyone got changed, packed their bags, and they come out and says, "Right, you're going to do it then, Brown?" Not a problem. I went to smack him and I got jumped by all three and chinned. Yeah, I then had to go meet my dad, and with a black eye. "I'm sure you didn't have a black eye on parade." Yeah. We'll talk about it later.
Harry, I'm assuming that's similar to your first year or so in
Yeah,
in
exactly.
the army,
That's
is
exactly
it?
what it was like.
What was it like? Was you enjoying it? Was it?
When I first joined, yeah, I think so. I was at Sandhurst, and it was, I think, you know, having grown up in that atmosphere, I had a sort of sense of it, but I had never, you know, held a rifle or really, I didn't have any sort of sense of what was going on. But I think I did enjoy it, and I think it, you know, Sandhurst is essentially a leadership course. They just use infantry tactics to teach you what to do, and I think in that sense it was quite fun. Everyone was in the same boat, and then. Yeah, it was, and I deployed very quickly to Iraq, so it felt very real after platoon. Went on to do our sort of professional course at Brecon for infantry, and the sort of it was very quick, and it felt very real at Sandhurst, for me anyway, and for all of us there. You know, there were people over years above us getting, you know, going, deploying, getting injured, and so in that sense, yeah, it was quite focused. Yeah.
And you'd have been aware of those injuries and the TV reports, and of course your dad, and you had other people close to you that were in. You said it felt real. You were in charge of guys on the ground. Was it that? Was it real?
Yeah, so I mean, I deployed to Basra in 2007 and was, you know, 23-year-old in charge of, you know, 32, I say in charge, you know, we all know it doesn't work like that, but I was normally in charge of 30-odd riflemen, and we had 4 armoured vehicles, and and we were bouncing around Basra trying to do our best, but it was pretty challenging, and we had injuries, we had a killed in action, and that was you know, really full on for a 23-year-old, but you know, you're trained to do it, and I think at the time, I think it was the job I wanted to do, and I felt very positive about it, and was really motivated to do more and get better at it. And I also think, I suppose just to finish on that, I think, you know, I never felt that it was going to happen to me. You know, maybe for a couple of moments here and there, but I don't think you ever think, oh, you know, maybe I'm going to get injured. And I think, because if you did think that too much, you'd freeze up and you wouldn't be able to do the job. But I do think as an officer, because you're so busy and you're in command, there's less time to think and to sort of mull over. Whereas I think often for sort of riflemen who have, and private soldiers sometimes, there's less time to, there's more time to think about, you know, it could be me.
I suppose the joys of a 23-year-old man's brain as well. You know, that seeking of adventure, not thinking it's going to be you, and but taking it in your stride as a well-trained individual. And Gemma, you said you were one of the first to kind of go through, or one of the first female cohort to go through Sandhurst and be treated and did everything the same as your male counterparts. Was it like that when you got to your regiment, your first posting?
Yeah, I mean, I say we did everything the same. We carried less weight and things, but you did the infantry course, like the infantry base Sandhurst course. I think when I got to the regiment, I was meant to have Alpha Troop, and I was put to Bravo Troop because the staff sergeant didn't want a female troop commander. So, you know, right from the get-go, there was quite accepted kind of... I was in the Royal Logistic Corps, you know, biggest corps in the British Army at the time. But there was always this... You constantly had to fight to be part of and to be accepted by. Now, I was very lucky because I was physically very able, so I could keep up with the guys on, you know, on all the fitness stuff and those type of things. I could carry the same weight. So it was easier for me to feel part of. But I would say, certainly looking back, it certainly wasn't safe to show femininity. I don't mean in a gendered sense. I mean, there was very much, it would equal weakness. So I learned very quickly I wanted to be one of the lads because that meant you were safe. I think that's the easiest way to describe it. But, you know, back then, I loved it. You know, I didn't see anything wrong with that. I enjoyed it. I quite enjoyed being tougher, rougher, and a little less human. You know, I thrived off all of that. Looking back now, I can see that I minimised and denied a huge amount of myself, which wasn't helpful longer term. But back then, it was just normal, and it was the way that you survived, actually.
Is that about kind of fitting in as well? Proving yourself and fitting into the kind of mainstream? I
think absolutely fitting in. The reality is, as a woman, you were in the minority. You know, I think it was about 10% of us across the army were women. And if you were part of the group, because the team matters, because the team is at the heart of everything you do. You can't afford to be on the outside of the team. So to be safe, you needed to be on the inside. You didn't need to be othered. So you work very, very hard to belong. And I think that belonging and wanting to belong and being part of the family is really, really key. In lots of and it manifests in lots and lots of different ways.
Simon, what was your first tour?
So I got sent to Germany, posted to Germany in 98 after doing my trade course. I deployed to Kosovo in 99 with the King's Royal Hussars. Came back from there. What
was Kosovo? What was the role?
Like I say, we initially were in Macedonia, so we were staged there until, you know, the diplomatic stuff had allegedly been sorted out. I was actually head of an operation Lambs to the Slaughter. So they came up with this ingenious idea that, because it was all mountainous roads and bridges, if we send all the recovery assets in first, well, blows up or triggers a trap, we just doze it out of the way, and we can all carry on. I was in a Land Rover at the front of all these armoured vehicles, which was curious. Mind you, Sergeant Major I thought about driving off at bridge. But yeah, so that was it. And then we obviously went through the process of the Serbians withdrawing, you know, to each line of latitude as we were meant to do, and all kind of went relatively well. I remember at a checkpoint where they were all throwing rotten fruit at us, IPVs, and spitting at us, till the Challenger pointed its barrel at them, and they all shut their hatches right quick. And then we went back, and like I said, as Remy, I'm not going to say engineer because I know you'll get upset about that. But yeah, you know, we were there to help rebuild the infrastructure, and obviously when we started going to Prodjeva and Pristina, and then out to local communities, we understood why the Serbians were so keen to get out of there in good order. Why? Because of the ethnic cleansing. We started finding the mass graves, and so you were one of the teams in charge of sort of dealing with that, but I was in the teams roped in to help clear them out. You know what I mean? And and that was emotionally that was the toughest thing, because I'm a 20-year-old soldier thinking, you know, my job's to stop this sort of stuff happening. And actually I'm there cleaning it up. And it was very hard to integrate when I got home, because you found out, you know, you were very insignificant, because you come home and all your family's moved on, new houses, new jobs, new careers, relationships, kids, and you weren't there, you weren't involved, you weren't needed, you weren't necessary. And I found that really hard to adapt and get my head round. Angry or no, just insignificant, just unnecessary. It's like, I don't fit in here. I'd have this conversation with Mum right at dinner table, what I've just been doing for the last 3 months, when everyone else is really jovial and happy about what's going on in their lives. So I just boxed it all up, shoved it back in my head and thought, right, I can't wait to get back to camp and get on with life.
Harry, you said there was a killed in action in your Iraq
Mm.
tour. And what Simon's talking about then is not feeling supported back at home. Was there any conversation back at home with your family about, would your dad or your mum talk to you about, because you're in a leadership role, you have responsibility and...
Yeah, there's that sort of, that old idea that the platoon had 12 hours to sort of think about it, mull it over, get in a room, talk about it, and then we got on with the job. I remember the commanding officer saying, I'm going to send you out sooner than the platoon schedule would have normally allowed, so that you're back on it and no one's sort of dwelling. And that works from a sort of, what Gemma was saying, that works from a team operational sense. But it was a Fijian rifleman who was killed, and they have a very strong sense of community within the regiment and the army. But I think that whole idea that you box it up and then think about it when you get home was something that definitely happened on that tour. And I think from a military operational effectiveness sense, it really worked. And yeah, I spoke to family about it a bit, but at the same time, I was, much like Simon said, you want to get on with it and get on to the next challenge. And I think there's just this, there's often a sort of, I think in these situations, you just roll through these things, especially when you were young.
Would it have been because you were, I'll phrase it and kind of, you were doing stuff, and there had been lots of media the years before you arrived there, so public opinion was X. You were going out there to do a job, and impacting communities and your fellow soldiers and whatnot. Whereas Simon was onlooking at this point. So what I'm getting at is world view and perception, especially public perception, and then you twin that with a sense of you're doing the right thing. Maybe that's why you kind of go, young men can go on and do that. Do you feel like that?
Yeah, well, I think Iraq's interesting because at the time, actually, when we were there was a lot of political and public discussion about if we should be there, and even I think General Dannett was at the time saying, I'm not sure about this one, and writing letters to the government and things. And that's quite hard as a platoon commander when a rifleman, one of our platoon had been killed, and another rifleman comes up the next night and says, "Why are we here?" And that was quite hard to articulate, but at the same time it was so sort of kinetic, and the action that I actually found it quite easy to separate the politics from, I'm a soldier, there's this sort of mission, the sort of, I don't want to use the word brainwashing, but I'm going to use it, but that whole system within which you'd been trained to operate meant that you could just keep going through it, and that's sort of the way effective armies are trained, I think. Actually, in Afghanistan, I found it easier to say, well, the government of Afghanistan's invited us in. There's sort of a UN mandate, or a NATO mandate, should I say. So it was slightly different to Iraq, which felt much more sort of precarious as a sort of just thing that you could communicate to your riflemen effectively.
Gemma, how long was it between you joining and then you deploy into Kosovo?
Yeah, so I was at Sandhurst 96 for the year, and then saying straight away went on my technical course, if you like, to learn the trade of being a logistician. And then I was in Kosovo in 98. So it was a different type of mission. It was my first operational tour. We went out there, we were unarmed, we were in civilian clothing, there was no rank. We were living amongst the community. And technically, we were part of the OSCE as observers. We were there to verify the ceasefire. In reality, I was 24, and I was leading a patrol in our area of operations every day. We were operating to the west of Kosovo near it'd been a particularly hotbed area, a Pech or Payad, and I'd go out every day. We'd be patrolling on the ground. We'd be interviewing, really collating information and sending it back, the patrol reports at the back. I think it is frenetic, exactly as you're saying. Each day, you're going again, you're going again. I think the challenge I felt, metaphorically completely naked, because everything I'd relied upon in my training, I didn't have an SAAT there was no rank. All the structures had just gone out the window. Even things as simple as radio procedure. Well, it was multinational, and people were kind of using the radio to ask what sandwich they wanted for lunch. And meanwhile, you've got someone saying, "Contact, wait out." It was utterly chaotic. But our job was to verify, which meant building really close relationships with the locals on the ground, because that was where the information came from. And the reality was we lacked any kind of agency. We would build these relationships to get the information. We'd go back the next day and you'd be picking up the atrocities, and then you'd take photos of the atrocities, start to film them. And these are people that you've built. They have to be genuine relationships, otherwise you don't get the information. And I think there weren't any of the normal boundaries you'd have in a normal military environment. There weren't any of those. So there was mission creep. People were doing what they thought was best, when you went home at night, you didn't go home to a barracks and hand over to another patrol. You were living in a house, being watched, and it was constant threat, but it was absolutely exhilarating. Absolutely exhilarating. And while I was out there, incredible, although professionally, in terms of, you're trained as a leader and then you're tested, and you're like, well, I was leading essentially an infantry patrol, and guys that were far more experienced than I was. But I think, and you hold it together whilst you're doing it, because the pace is frenetic, and you have to, because people are looking at you to lead. But I think the lack of agency really started to trouble me. And politically, I couldn't help but be looking at what Milosevic was doing, and, the Rambouillet political agreements that were going on, and just become increasingly frustrated on the ground because we just had no agency.
Where was you getting that content from? Where was you getting the media from? Was it papers or?
The news and papers, but initially I was out there working in what was called a fusion cell, so all the intelligence reports would go across your desk and you'd be collating them and coming up with themes, etc. So, and there's two levels to that. I think there are traumatic events that you deal with yourself, actually tangibly, but then there's also the stuff and the photos and the images and the video that you're going through that's going across your desk as well at the same time, which you kind of layers on top of it all.
Simon, when did you go to Iraq?
So my first tour in 2003 with the Scots DGs, then my second tour was 2006 with, I was 2 Lancs, but I was attached to the Green Jackets.
So 2003 you'd crossed the border from Kuwait, is that right? So you was on Telic, crossed the border from Kuwait into Iraq, came back, what's that then, 2 years later?
Yeah, 2.5,
Yeah, 2.5 years later you were back in.
Yeah.
Had it changed?
Yeah, like you say, we when we crossed the border, there was kind of, it was strange because one day you stood in a corner having it with the baddies, and then, 3 days later we're handing out water at the same corner to refugees, and it was a bit of an head mesh, you know what I mean? Going, it was dodgy here a couple of days ago, but and obviously then when we left in 2003 after that Telic 1, there was kind of this positive environment. It hadn't quite gone peak tongue by then. And obviously as Telic 2 and Telic 3 started to cross over, the insurgency got a little bit more excited. And by the time we went over in Telic 9 in 2006, it had gone, it was full on. We were the baddies and we were getting it.
What role was you in?
So my job as a mechanic in 2006 when I went out there, I was a recovery commander basically. I was the AA in Basra. Anything broken down, blown up, driven into a ditch. My job to go square it away. And we were at Old State Building, which was a forward operating base in the centre of the town, centre of the city. So pretty much anything that happened through the night, we were the recovery assets that we used to go and deal with that.
Harry, when you went to Afghan, so 2009, were you equipped then, physically, mentally? Was you a leader of men?
Yeah, I thought I was Arnold Schwarzenegger. I was the universal soldier. I thought I was just that arrogance of being at the top of your game and just thinking you could do anything. I just remember walking across, on patrols and just thinking, that I was in command. Actually, I had a slightly different job then, but I had a small team of about 4 of us we were meant to just sort of beetle around looking for information and getting into all the sort of local areas and starting to sort of do what they used to call hearts and minds, but what we called influence. And actually, it was just the only influence was kinetic. It was just a sort of massive firefight half the time. And then obviously it all changed. But I really remember that feeling.
What was the day-to-day life like?
Yeah, so we were in a forward operating base in Nad Ali, which is sort of in Helmand, west of Lashkar, and it was sort of desert area that had been irrigated by the US in the 60s and 70s, I think. So it was sort of quite flat, irrigated land, and it was just we were on a cycle of patrols, and as ever, you spend half your time securing junctions so that so you can be reinforced or resupplied. So there's a bit of that going on, and it was interesting. Day to day, it was a really, and it was exhilarating. As Gemma said, it was an amazing, it was an incredible environment to be in and very challenging, both from a sort of leadership, personal, but also operational point of view.
Were people getting hurt?
Yeah, people were getting hurt, and it was just there was an operation called Panchai Palang that happened at a similar time, and it was all ramping up. We were attached to the Welsh Guards, so they were having quite a tough time, and had a very tough time just before we turned up. And actually, I did the relief in place, so I went and sort of embedded with them, and they'd had some really, injuries like mine actually, a number in just a few weeks. And you could tell that they were having a tough time. But then our company group came in and it was an interesting patch. Every night on the radio you'd be hearing the sort of the reports from around Helmand of all the different injuries and what was going on. So it was it often felt like we were sort of out on a limb and had been sort of forgotten about because there was so much going on elsewhere.
Can I take you to the point of injury then?
Yeah.
What happened? What was the day like?
So it was a sort of company operation. Every tea time and every morning we call it the tea time tick. So every morning they would shoot at us from this group of abandoned houses, and it was really annoying. So the company commander was like, right, we need to do something about this. So we sort of set up a sort of loose idea of a sort of operation where we'd go and try and ambush them in the middle of the night when they were getting into position. Of course, trying to get 60 odd soldiers out of a gate without anyone seeing you is impossible, and all the local nationals were looking at what was going on. So we got there, sat in a ditch all night, and nothing happened. And then as we withdrew, they attacked, sort of classic, waiting for us to be on the withdrawal back to base. And we were sort of withdrawing, as you'd imagine, I can't remember any of the terms, it's been so long, but sort of 1 foot on the ground, withdrawing, all quite good fun, didn't feel very lethal, GPMG down, firing into hedges. It was just sort of and the sun was coming up, it all felt quite sort of relaxed in a way. And we got to a position where I could see the camp, and I thought, let's just take time for breakfast. So, and I walked across a field, thinking that as it was a sort of covered field, it would be, it would be safe, and I stood on the bomb, an IED of some description that had been dug in.
Were you aware of it? Were you conscious?
Yeah, absolutely. I can still sort of remember just being flipped over and the sort of violence of it. It didn't feel particularly loud, it just felt sort of very violent, yeah.
And people around you? Medics?
Yeah, very quickly people around me, but I do remember hearing their voices. The first thought was like, I'm going to stand up, dust myself off, and I'll walk back to camp in the way you might fall off your bike. And then obviously the pain and the sort of feeling that actually, okay, I'm not going to stand up. But also the shouts and all these voices that I knew, from the people that I'd worked with for the last few years, shouting, and hear, because I had the radio on, I could hear them reporting my injury and my ZAP number. And they were waiting because they were clearing the ground. I was like, I'm going to swear. I was like, that. Get here quickly. I need help. But eventually they were sort of on me, and turning me. I was on my face, they turned me over in tourniquet and sort of getting bloods into me. And I think then, I think I sort of thought I was conscious, but you know, when you hear back, that I sort of went in and out of consciousness, and then they got me on the helicopter and flew me back to Bastion.
So just to, so I understand, you detonated an IED.
Mm.
You know, you've had two leg injuries.
Yeah.
Right. Then medics took time to get to you because they were clearing.
Yeah, it was probably seconds, right? But
Okay.
it felt like, get over here now. Yeah.
And then they tourniquets on to stem the flow.
Yeah.
And you said would they put in blood?
Well, they
was
put in
that?
fluids and
Fluids
plasma.
into you,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I mean, I was very lucky that there was a helicopter flying over that was off to pick up somebody who'd have a camel bite. And they looked down, I think, like, there's an American. I was like, oh, that doesn't look great. So they landed very quickly, and I think, you know, in some senses I was quite lucky. I had traumatic amputation of my left leg, and my right leg came off later through infection, 10, 15 days later. But it was knackered as well. But I was losing blood very quickly, and I think if that helicopter hadn't been flying over, I probably wouldn't have made it, like a lot of these stories. And it took 18 minutes to get me all the way back to Bastion, which was at the time the best trauma hospital in the world. So, you know, there was a lot of luck involved as well.
Gemma, earlier on you said there was atrocities going on, and I suppose that's where we're going to take you here, because this is essentially your point of injury. What was going on? Was you recovering historical graves, or was it people that were there one day and gone the next?
Yeah, you know, before I go there, I'm going to be absolutely candid. When I sit here and I listen to your story there, and I'm sure, you know, to Simon's, I am looking at me. There's nothing injured, and I still, even just listening to that there, I still find there's still a huge amount of shame in me, and it's the stigma in me of, right, well, what, I don't know quite how to describe it, almost this sense of, well, you know, what are you not bleating about, but there's nothing wrong with you. You're here, you know. And I still feel that today, even just listening there. It's quite, yeah, it's there. Anyway, so we weren't going in and finding mass graves, etc. It was happening on the ground at the time. So it was ethnic cleansing in its rawest form. I think when we went out there, everyone kind of thought, this is another Bosnia. It wasn't. Kosovo was actually very different to Bosnia. And so I'd go out, patrol, sit with village elders, you know, smoking a cigarette or, you know, drinking coffee and chatting to them. We might be another day speaking to KLA commanders, or, you know, in Serbian police stations, or just verifying VJ barracks with the Serbian. You know, there's a whole mix there. But you'd go out, and there'd be the emotional piece of children coming up and just asking you where dad's gone or where their brother's gone. They haven't seen them and they last saw them, you know, that side. And then there'd be the very real piece of going out on patrol, getting a grid reference and pulling up, you know, what you're going to find. It might be an ambush, and you're then there to verify the bodies, cordon it off, to hold the villagers back, you know, to video it. There's one particular ambush that was what I kept getting flashbacks from. We were called to a grid reference. There was a white Yugo just before a kind of rickety bridge. And it's not like a normal military operation, so there's no forward recce that's gone. So as you're approaching the scene, you've got to, you know, you're looking for booby traps, there's snow on the ground, it's just you four, and there's no one coming to get you if you know, it wasn't even a helicopter that was allowed across the border for, you know, so it was you four, or sometimes five of you, that were very much reliant on each other. And I remember approaching the vehicle, and I'd seen dead bodies before, you know, that you'd expect, and you become quite desensitized to it, but this was really different because the car had been attacked from the right-hand side, and there must have been, you know, 60 plus bullet holes through this and through the passengers inside. And it was horrific. You know, what was left was horrific. But the bit that I found really hard and where the flashbacks and the nightmares kept coming was when the crowd grew and we, picked up this cord, and I remember trying to put the cordon in and the ground was frozen and I couldn't get and then a car approached and the lady came to the back of the crowd, and she came under the cordon and fell just in, where we were standing, and it was her boys that were in the car, dead in the car, and I still remember the noise and the grief. It's a howl, and then the fear trying to hold what's a very angry crowd now back, when you're unarmed, and no one's coming. So that there was that, and then I'd say there were probably 2 or 3 instances. Another incident was when we'd have to go and verify. Villagers would pull you in and say, come and look at this. And I remember going around the back of a house and a shallow grave had been dug, and they used to put lime, like this white lime, around it. So it's it's a shallow pit, really, as opposed to a grave. And they do that because they'd want to preserve the bodies, because they would want to bury the bodies with the family grave, but they couldn't move the bodies at that time because it wasn't safe. And I remember going up to this grave, and this village, it wasn't the elder, but it was an older man, and there was ice on the top of the grave, and he just kept banging the ice, and there's all this kind of white lime swirling, and you could see hair, and I remember red Wellington boots. They were fixed in the ice sheet just up, not the big Wellington boots like we have, but they're kind of like half-size ones, and then the knocking and the hair. So there were it was kind of, it wasn't daily, but there were instances happening all the time, but then there were a few that really stayed with me that I couldn't quite, it was like I couldn't process them.
Was you, when you were there on the ground, were you kind and compassionate? Would you say was that part of your job, to be compassionate to people?
It absolutely, I mean, if you looked at I suppose the job description, not necessarily we were there to verify, but the situation was so fragile and chaotic on the ground, you didn't get information. They wouldn't talk to you unless you built those relationships. It was an implied task, really. So you had to build that trust and those relationships to get the information, because this was essentially guerrilla. The KLA were fighting, and then you see them teaching in a school the next thing. So there was no kind of normal boundaries of a combatant and a non-combatant. It was just it was like this moving mirrors everywhere. You'd be speaking to the military police on the Serbian side one moment, and then they'd be dressed in their black balaclavas and waving at you as you went off patrol and they went in to do something else. It was it was like this cat and mouse. It was there's just no agency. I think that's it. Utterly powerless and helpless, and yet everything you're trained to do as a soldier is to make a difference, and yet it was very hard to see that. And it even got to the stage where, when it in the January of the 99, as it really started to get, they were getting ready to evacuate us, and someone was waiting across the border to come and get us out, probably. It even got to the stage where even if people spoke to you, I had to ask the question, have I actually just killed that person? Because the next day, they'd be seen giving us information or speaking to us, and the Serbian population saw us as NATO spies. They didn't see us as neutral. So you couldn't trust anything on the ground. It was just constantly shifting.
Simon, can you take us to the few minutes before your injury? What was you doing?
We were in an area called Al-Qibla, and basically we'd just been into we'd been in to cause a bit of a problem, really, because there were supplies coming in. So we wanted to distract the baddies so that it's that supplies coming in. But then we knew there was a bloke in the area building bombs. So it was B Company, Green Jackets, who basically were running the op, and they'd gone in to arrest this bloke, and I thought I was literally just attached as on-site recovery if anything went wrong. But obviously having a weapons system commanding an armoured vehicle, you're kind of on overwatch. Well, like I say, they got this bloke and all his mates weren't very happy, so they started ringing up all their other mates. And before you knew it, all hell broke loose. You know, one of my mates who was my driver at the time describes it as being like Black Hawk Down. We had, you know, like I say, we had a selection of armoured, 4 bulldogs and a Warrior 513. And yeah, we were just absolutely peppered. We managed to subdue the enemy, and then as we went to withdraw from the area, 0 Bravo call sign, which is the command call sign. 24 Alpha, we're not moving. 24 Alpha being the REME asset. Yeah, we're not moving, so I went back in. And because the enemy had been subdued at this point, it wasn't quite as dangerous, but went back in and yeah, the vehicle wasn't going nowhere. It was foobard, I think is the term. And so we went, right, we'll recover it, but at this point the insurgents that were still hanging about realised we had a casualty vehicle and started having a bit of a turkey shoot. So at that point we had to connect up the equipment, so bearing in mind my vehicle's 30 tonne, that vehicle's about 15 tonne. You can imagine how heavy the towing equipment is. It's not just a rope that you get out your back of your dad's car. So we connected that up, we did all that fine, jumped in the vehicle. I was like John Wayne, just no hit me. Ran up the front of the Warrior, jumped into the commander's hatch, got onto weapon system, you know, started looking for baddies, and then the driver went, can't see. All the dust had kicked up from the vehicles pulling out, and with the weight and the people on board, we didn't want to drive into a ditch. So for those, anyone never seen a picture of Iraq, side of every road's a drainage ditch. So if we put in that, we're just putting more people in danger. So £80,000 worth of sighting system, I can't see through dust. So I've put my head out the turret to use the old Mark 1 eyeball. Yeah, you clear, just go, go, go. And that's when I felt the impact on the side of my head. So the sniper got me, the bullet went in my left cheek, come out my right cheek. As you can imagine, it rained me Wednesday morning. Fortunately, being a Yorkshireman, I'm hard as nails. So the bullet didn't knock me out. And that's effectively what saved my life. Because both cheekbones were destroyed, the jaw broke in 4 places, my palate collapsed. I'm told by medics afterwards there was never any danger of bleeding out because there's just not enough blood supply to your face, but I would have suffocated if I'd not been conscious. So I put my thumb in my mouth, held my palate up, we got out of the killing zone. At that point, a sergeant major called Dave Youngs, he jumped on top of the wagon and he took over commanding the vehicle, effectively surfing the vehicle through Basra. A young medic got on top and he was feeding back information to the...
Where were you?
I was in the commander's hatch of a Warrior.
You're still there?
I was still in the commander's hatch. Yeah, well, I got hit and just dropped back straight into it. And obviously, the layout of a Warrior, you can't get to the commander. So that's why I had to do my own first aid. So he's hanging in the turret, he's this young Irish kid, and he's feeding back so that the med centre's ready for me. And then, and like I say, I'm just sat there thinking, well, I don't know why they're panicking, I can't be that badly hurt, otherwise I'll be unconscious. And in my head, I just didn't realise how badly I'd been hurt. Got to the medical facilities at Basra Palace, and climbed off the wagon, got put on a stretcher, started sort of trying for morphine. Because it was a head injury, they couldn't give me morphine, so I was just put into a drug-induced coma. I woke up then, Christmas Eve 2006.
How long was you in the coma?
So it was about 17, 18 days. Like I said, I was back in the UK within 72 hours. But yeah, I woke up and I was oblivious for 3 days as to what had happened, because I thought I'd been in a coma about 6 months, and like I say, it was 18 days. And yeah, and then it's obviously when you start getting the full prognosis of what's happened.
And when you opened your eyes, could you see?
No, so when I first, I'd heard the doctor saying to my parents I were blind, and I'm thinking, well, see on about here, you're blind, and it didn't make sense to me, because in the coma I could hear things, but there was no context. So when I came out of the coma, I just thought my eyes were glazed, because I only had light perception, literally need the lights on or off. And then sort of when the doctors came and started talking to me, I was trying to ask about my sight. And, you know, what have you got a patch over my eye or something? I went, no, your left eye's destroyed and your right eye is, we're sorry, but we don't think you'll get any more vision. So at that point, that was the point where, what do you mean I'm blind? And that was that was the dip before the bounce back on recovery.
Harry, so you went to Bastion,
Mm-hmm.
world class, kind of gold standard care there. Flown back to, what did you go to, Birmingham?
Yeah, Birmingham, yeah.
And then, can you talk about the process of you arriving there?
Well, I mean, I was out. From the moment I got to, my last memory was going through the sensation of going through the doors in Bastion, like sort of coming off the helicopter and going into the doors and then nothing. And it was, I think, 10 days or something before I came to. But they, you know, I got aeromeded, whatever that process is, plane, helicopter, Birmingham, and then lots of surgical work. And then I came round and, yeah, there wasn't like a, you know, wake. It felt much more gradual for me. It wasn't a sudden like, shit, you know, I've lost my legs. I don't know why, whether that was the drugs or whether I had sort of taken in the context when I was in some sort of coma. But yeah, came to in the intensive care, and yeah, it felt very gradual. You know, parents, friends, doctors, sort of around me and sort of giving me information in quite a sort of gradual way. And I had my right leg at the time. And my left leg had been traumatically amputated, but below the knee. So actually, really just a scratch, really. But actually, my right leg was really badly injured, and it had a fungal infection that they hadn't sort of quite clocked.
Was it intact?
It was intact, but it was pretty damaged all down the inside. So the calf was basically all gone. I remember the doctor putting like a sort of a sensor against my big toe, and feeling it, but not being able to move my toes. So I could feel, I had the sensory, but not the motor nerves left. But anyway, I went in for a sort of routine debridement. I mean, I don't know how many operations I had, probably 11 or 12 in that period. And during that, they sort of opened me up, and there was this fungal infection, which was a problem at the time because it was quite unusual in this country to have those sorts of fungal infections. And it was to do with the environment of Afghanistan and where we were being blown up. So yeah, they just made a decision in the operating theatre to take off the leg, and actually, you know, there's no emotion attached to that at all. I think I'm probably far more mobile having had that leg taken off in hindsight than I ever would have been having to try and save it. And there were lots of people in my recovery who were around me who had legs they were trying to save, and actually a year down the line they were having them amputated.
Was there ever a conversation to go above or below the knee?
It was lit, you know, I went in and when I came out, it had gone. It wasn't, there was no...
So they weren't trying to like, let's save a bit?
No, it was we need to save his life, cut it off there, in a very sort of immediate way. It was touch and go, yeah.
And then recovery in hospital recovery, how long did that last?
So I was quite unusual. I was 6 weeks in, which was quite a short amount of time, and I've never been back for any surgery, which is quite unusual. And part of that, I mean, every time I go and see a plastic surgeon, they're like, we can tidy you up. And no thanks, because I'm quite scared of...
So the last major operation you had was when you left?
Yeah, but when I left.
2009?
Yeah. So if you take my sockets off and my liners, it's pretty ugly. And lots of people have it all sort of tidied up and made to look pretty, but I think it's because I had that fungal infection, the sort of anxiety of going under, and the thought of getting another infection and losing another bit of mobility, or another bit of your stomach is just too much. So
it's also traumatic, isn't it? There's a big trauma. I know several lads who have gone again and again and again, and it's a big trauma. It's a life-changing thing for a long period of time. Yeah. When they go, I can't believe that. I've never heard.
Yeah, that. I think I'm quite unusual. Yeah.
Well,
that's it. Well, in that sense. Yeah.
And then from hospital, where next?
So straight to Headley Court. I can't remember his name, but he drove me all the way down. I felt so sick all the way. But anyway, long drive from Birmingham all the way to Headley Court. And then, into the sort of rehab phase. And the first few days was like, I want to get me off all these pills. So they said, sure, and they took me off all the pills. And it was like the first scene of Apocalypse Now, with the thing going, I felt so dreadful. Take me back to hospital, give me the drugs back. It was horrendous. But yeah, into the rehab of learning to walk again.
And when you're there, is that physios, doctors? Who is giving you most contact? Who is there rehabbing you?
So the nurses were there to sort of stop. Every time you started bleeding from wearing prosthetics and things, but it was really physio and prosthetic and you, and a bit of PTI as well. But doing quite a lot of physical training with you. But what it really felt like to me was like a sort of you, the physio, and the prosthesis. Who are the people who make prosthetics?
Yeah.
The prosthetist, in a sort of team, if that's what it felt like, and we were going to learn to walk again. Yeah.
And so that's part. So big part. I'm staying with you for a little bit because this is. If you look at recovery from someone who'd, amputation in Afghan, right the way through, completely supported with world-class care, world-class physios, world-class surgeons, world-class equipment. So you go right the way through. How long was you there for?
So I was a sort of inpatient for 1 year, about 1 year, and then I became an outpatient, so I'd go back quite often to start with. But even in that 1 year, it wasn't constant. It would be sort of 2 weeks in, 2 weeks at home, or 4 weeks in, 4 weeks at home, and then home became my unit. So you were sort of bouncing between the two places as you got sort of more confident, and as you got new bits of kit became available, and you got fitter and used to it, and from a sort of physical sense. But I think for me, that whole process of learning to walk again felt very positive. You know, there was almost like a sort of, when you have a chance to be active and overcome something, that gave you something to focus on, a purpose, if you like. And I think, it was very different. I remember coming back from Iraq, and it was, in the pub after 24 hours, and the mentality of that in terms of having no decompression. Whereas I think it's quite a hard thing to communicate for people to understand, I think. But being seriously injured, in fact, you're looked after so well that you're not going to fall through the cracks because you're so visible. And you get this really long decompression, which sort of goes in hand with learning to walk again. Well, that's certainly how I felt in my experience.
Gemma, when from the start of showing symptoms after you'd come back, when was the firstly, what symptoms you referred to nightmares and flashbacks? What are the symptoms, and how long did it take you to then seek professional help?
Yeah, so I came back. I was the only one from my regiment that had gone to Kosovo on that particular mission. So I came back into an environment where there was no one with any shared experience, and there was no decompression. You were back in the regiment, and I remember there wasn't a troop for me because at the time, and I remember being given a job to go and itemise the silver in the officers' mess, and I remember standing in the officers' mess just going, what? I can't say it, what I was really thinking, can I? Just, and then I was told to go and do the march and shoot, and I was like, really? And there was just this real lack of meaning, and it just kind of grew this contempt in me because there was nothing purposeful to do, if that makes sense. I started trying to talk about it. I needed to kind of process and try and talk about what had happened, and the regiment were getting ready to go out with NATO, and I was wanting to talk. But honestly, I was probably socially very clunky, because once I started talking, it started, going at 1,000 miles an hour, and people in the officers' mess would stay away from the mad woman in the corner. And so then I just thought, actually, well, I'll just withdraw then because it's safer, So I just then withdrew, and I started self-medicating because I couldn't sleep. And then I was frightened to go to sleep because I'd have, flashbacks that were terrifying. I was, within, you'd probably expect the hypervigilance to stay there for a little while, but still at month 2 and month 3, I was so hypervigilant. It was like, best description, I think, is that you're hovering next to a fire alarm constantly, whether it's a noise, a smell, just hovering. So in the end, I would drink to be able to sleep, and then I'd wake up 2 hours later. I'd be in the bar earlier and earlier, and there wasn't anyone to talk to. It was. I didn't want to be othered. It was 1999. You didn't talk about mental illness. I was frightened what it meant, and then. What happened was I'd been promoted, I was sat as a 2IC, and I was sat in my office. I'd taken a detailed tasking from HQ, put the phone down, I was like, I have no idea what they just said to me. And it's not really the done thing to pick the phone up again and go, Colonel, do you mind just repeating that? And I put the phone down and I just went, emotions just went. And at the time, my OC happened to walk into my office. This was about 3 months later. And he went, you need to get yourself down to the MO. And I went to the MO, and my medical notes, he wrote PTSD question mark, and they sent me to Aldershot Garrison for treatment. A community psychiatric nurse started treating me, and very, very quickly she started doing re-exposure therapy, which, because we'd taken photos of all these incidents, and I still had all the photos and the videos and everything, so she told me to bring them in, and I literally had to go through these photos and describe what had happened, and she had this little cassette recorder, and she'd record what I was saying, and then she'd give me the tape at the end, and because it finished on the hour, done. So now I'm really traumatised, having opened all this stuff up. She'd go, here you go, listen to that between now and the next session. So I'd walk out the bright blue lino floor, drive back to the regiment, and just carry on with the day job, and then listen to this tape, go back the next week. And it then just very, very quickly unravelled. I started seeing things. I went from kind of coping to a mess. And then I was put on medication. My career, I was downgraded because I had a suicide attempt. It wasn't that I wanted to kill myself, I just wanted it to stop, is the way I'd describe it. And then really, the psychiatrist said that, that you're downgraded, considered permanent, which meant that you couldn't get promoted. And all the, recommended for staff college and future colonel of a regiment and, winning the Carmen Sword, etc., just suddenly went in the bin. And I felt incredibly betrayed, actually, because I'd actually gone and asked for help. My career was now stopped, but what they diagnosed me with, even though they'd given me all this re-exposure therapy, was that the psychiatrist said, you've got moderate affective disorder due to your genetics and your inheritance. And at the time, I think because and there was no mention of PTSD, there was no mention to the re-exposure therapy they'd given me, none of it, and at the time, I think because you trusted the system, I'd shut down from my civilian friends and family because the army was my family. So I didn't question, I didn't think, I know, I'll go and get a second opinion, or... so there was no... and it specifically says not attributable to her military service. And yeah, I felt gaslighted, I'll be honest, because then the therapy shifted with the psychiatric nurse within a couple of months, from doing all of the re-exposure stuff to, now tell me about your childhood, now tell me about this, tell me about your father. And my father had had an episode of depression when he was a very young man, which I shared. And then it's suddenly on my psychiatric notes, it's like, right, well, you've inherited this genetic predisposition to depression, which is obviously a problem. And and I think those feelings of being utterly betrayed, I was angry anyway, and it just turned into this rage. It was that deep. It was just this absolute rage, which actually, in terms of my recovery, set me back and meant that it became far more complex, because then you have these layers that go over the top of what starts as PTSD.
Well, I think all of this so far is complex. There's layers to everything, and you could go off on everyone's story here and touch on the moral and ethical code of what was going on. You could talk about why some people should have this care physically and potentially not psychologically. The mastery of the surgeons and the physios. It's complex, and we could spend a lot more time picking that out. Simon, when we talk about recovery, and we're not going to get into the minutiae of recovery with you, but why was community so important? Why was like being part of a team, and how did that help you recover?
Yeah, I mean, you can say I was part of the wireless when I went home. I was sent home because no one knew how to deal with it, so I had to ring up on a Monday morning until I wasn't dead or in prison. And that was basically it. In a way, that was good for me because of where I was in my life. I knew what I was doing. I knew I was going to do something next, I didn't know what, but so I worked with my family and my community and friends outside the military, you know, because my unit was still away, so my team were away, and it was, I had to find a new family, a new thing, and with my dad being ex-military, that helped. And yeah, I sat at home and I thought, right, well, I need to retrain, I know my career's done, so I need to work out what I'm going to do next. And that community and that family, my rugby team back home that I used to play with, they all sort of rallied round. I remember they used to kidnap me on a Saturday, get me liquored up, and then leave me on my dad's doorstep and run away. That's how my rugby team treated me, and it kind of dawned on me that they didn't see me as a different person.
Yeah.
So kind of I wasn't, and that kind of awakened that in me, that I was still the same person. I just had different challenges.
Were they proud of you?
Oh yeah, without doubt. And you know, it was one of the things that they used to mock me about being in the military when I went and played rugby with them and went on dues, but it was a pride thing. You know, they could mock me, but no one else could. You know, and that's even now I get it because I'm obviously on a military pension. I get called tax dodger and all sorts. But well, besides somebody else do that, they can do it, but nobody else can. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I was lucky that I had that family, that community outside the military that I could rely on when that one went away. And that's where it started, that catalyst. And the catalyst started in the hospital when you laid there sulky, feeling sorry for yourself, and I found out two of my mates had unfortunately sent me an IED. And he kind of said, all of a sudden you think, why am I sulking? I'm still here. It's very easy to focus on everything you've lost, because that's what we look at. We look at what we don't have. But to actually remember what you have got and be a survivor, not a victim. And when the two lads got killed, that's when it kind of dawned on me that I needed to refocus my life. And my recovery was based around looking at what I still had instead of sulking about what I'd lost.
Gemma, what worked for you? You know, this is a long process. And I was speaking to Emily Mayhew before, and we were talking about time, and it takes a long time to recover. Maybe for life. What has worked for you in the last 25 years?
Yeah, I think, so I left the army of my own accord, very angry, with two fingers stuck up, really. And I regret that, you know. And then I struggled for years until it got so bad that I couldn't function. I wasn't going out, I wasn't answering the phone, you know. And my husband sought private help because there was no, you know, didn't seem to be any other help available really. So I ended up in the Priory, admitted to the Priory hospital as an inpatient and then as an outpatient for a long period of time. And during that period of time, I had, you know, they didn't really know how to deal with a military veteran with PTSD, so I was in group therapy with civilians in narrative therapy, and I remember, you know, I'd be reading out my narrative of the ambush or whatever, and it was just so clunky and unpalatable. It was like, right, well, I'll stop talking because this is dreadful, and you stop talking because it just didn't work. So I had narrative therapy, drama therapy, art therapy, CBT, EMDR, tapping, you know, you name it, everything. And I would say that, and that continued, it didn't stop when I was discharged from the Priory. I would say there were certain therapies in there that helped started to shift things. It wasn't that the memories went, but I was able to kind of remove some of the fear from them, and reframe some things, I think is probably the best way, and talk about them. It gave me a safe space to really talk about what I needed to talk about. And then I've had years really of, I suppose my recovery journey would be like when I'm feeling really well, and and maybe not on meds, and then when suddenly something will trigger, it might be something on the news, it might be something in my life, or whatever it would be, and then it plunges again. Because the reality is living with PTSD is exhausting. You know, you go, but everything is, you know, it's exhausting. Everything's a threat. You're covering off. Every meeting has to be done perfectly in preparation before it because there's no what if. You know, everything is. And so you then go to your GP when you're not feeling well. You're back on meds. They don't really know what level of meds, or let's try a different med. And then you're waiting on a list to go and have therapy, and it's basically 6 sessions of CBT, which for me with PTSD is useless. But it's what NICE guidelines say, so you have the 6 sessions of CBT. And more often than not, you're sat in front of a therapist who maybe isn't culturally aware of some of the experiences that you've had, or maybe is out of their depth in terms of the type of stuff that you might share. So you get to session 6 and you're just starting to get a bit of trust, and then you're done. You know, so really unhelpful, some of the stuff. But I would say EMDR was incredibly traumatic. You know, I vomited during sessions and afterwards, but it did shift something. But the biggest turning point for me, and it's been in the last few years, has been taking a far more holistic approach where it's not just top down and looking at bottom up, and the whole body, and also the environment that I'm living in, the lifestyle changes that I've needed to make. And I think pivotal to that was, I was introduced, there was a lady, Mandy Bostwick, who introduced me to some bodywork practitioners. There was an osteopath and hot, cold exposure, extreme hot, cold exposure, breathing techniques in terms of, because I couldn't meditate without something physical with it. And it's not that the cognitive stuff is useless, I wouldn't say that, but the cognitive stuff on its own hasn't helped me. But the whole piece, the top-down and bottom-up approach, the breathing, the movement, and the cognitive piece has been incredibly helpful. And I went on a retreat in 2019. It was run by veterans on a farm in the middle of Wales. And it was the most incredible experience for me because it did key things. One, I felt like I belonged again. No one said what had happened, but you just felt you belonged again with people that just understood. And you were accepted. You felt validated. There was no kind of gaslighting to it. It didn't matter what your injury was. You were just together. We did repeated hot, cold exposure. I still do cold exposure every day now. I have a cold tub out in the back, and you know, at 2-3 degrees, I plunge in it every day because it regulates my system. I learned how to breathe and meditate. We use the Wim Hof method, which I find really helpful because it's physical as well, rather than just mentally trying to do mindfulness. And also, I'm hesitant to say this because I don't want to be seen like a hippie sat on a hillside. But I did also, for me, what was missing, I think, in the therapy that I'd had before was it missed the whole spiritual component. It was completely missing the fact that my heart and my soul and a part of me was completely broken. And I didn't want to go there because I was too frightened, so I'd locked it in a box. And you could do as much brain stuff as you rational thinking as you wanted, but it wasn't touching the part of me that was still really, really hurting. And I was trying to control everything in a rational piece. And in the end, I said, no, I am actually going to take that substance. And I did. I didn't take a full psychedelic. I took Hape, which is legal in this country. With the whole spiritual grounding ceremony, and it has been absolutely transformational for me. I think because it forced me to let go and give in. I won't go into detail what happened in that ceremony, but it shifted me to a completely new place. But the danger is, I think that, you know, because it's illegal, or it's very difficult to get on those type of studies using psychedelics. I've lost faith in the system and the mental health pathways, but I have to be very careful. I'm incredibly vulnerable that I don't just jump on any witch doctory thing and I'm taken advantage of, because by doing that, the power of it was because it was fully integrated after I'd done it. So there was care and love around me afterwards.
I think the military community, you look at the last 20 years, it's spearheaded well-being, it's spearheaded opening people's minds to physical disability and what can be achieved. But it also looks at alternate therapies like psychedelic therapies, and these now trials that are just opening up in King's College focusing on psilocybin and the use of that with PTSD and depression. So things are moving in that direction, certainly. Harry, I'd like you to kind of close us, if you would. And what is recovery?
Yeah, I mean, just listening to Gemma, I feel almost the opposite of what you were saying earlier about not feel. I don't know, because you can't see, you can't see your injury. But I feel very lucky in a way that actually, as far as I know so far, and I'm very aware that we can all go up and down. But I feel very level and loved, and I think, what am I trying to say? I actually. My injury, for the most part, is something that I feel quite positive about, and I think there's a moment where I thought, well, this is it. I'm not getting any better. You can throw every £80,000 prosthetic at me, but at the end of the day, you are disabled. You're going to be. This is it. And okay, things might get better or worse. And I think it's quite a sort of hard thing to swallow in a sense, because when you're going through recovery, you do think, I'm getting a bit better. But for me, there was a sort of plateau. And at that moment, it became about family, community, about finding new communities, a new job, a new purpose, a new worth. And I think that's sort of what recovery is for me. And I think the military has got better at providing communities and allowing people to go off into new communities and new areas. And I'm just so lucky with the education, the family, and everything I had as I was growing up, that I had the opportunity to go back and do art and write. And I know that lots of people in the military didn't have that. But so what's recovery for me? I think there becomes an element of managing the injury. It's a day-to-day thing, but it's become quite sort of automatic for me, for the most part. And I think it then becomes around recovery becomes around all those things that Gemma and Simon's talked about. The rugby team, finding new ways to be part of communities and not be other and feel part of stuff. And I think that's recovery for me. Being an asset to this country and society. And I think it's too much of a narrative where injured soldiers or injured people aren't contributing. And I think so many of the injured community are contributing and are an asset to society and communities. And I think that's recovery.
Guys, thank you so much. We'll leave it there.